Welcome back to S.W.A.T TV. I'm really happy to have Richard Nable here on our channel. Thanks a lot, Rich, for coming back and doing this interview.
Always great to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Rich. Today we are going to talk about very, very beautiful daggers and swords, bronze ones, and copper alloy ones. And I would like, before we go through them, just to make sure that I understood it correctly, these are from different cultures, Rich. Am I correct?
Yes, the ones I sent you are kind of a cross section. I believe there's Asian, European, and Persian.
Perfect. Let me just go and start sharing this, and then we can discuss them. Okay. Okay, Rich, what do we see here?
That is a copper alloy axe from the Hallstatt culture, which is named, I guess, eponymously for where the dig was in Austria. This particular piece was from a very famous collection in Germany, the Axel Gutmann collection. Wow. After he passed, I believe it was Christie's and Erman Historica that handled the auction of most of his estate.
Yes.
And I was fortunate enough to be able to purchase just this one piece.
Oh, okay. A very famous collection indeed. He was a big industrialist in Germany. Yes, it was Hermann Historical, definitely. And the other one, he said Christie's. I remember when Hermann Historical put it in Munich for sale, that, beautiful collection. Beautiful.
Oh, some amazing objects.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So, wow, Axel Gutmann, I mean, it's a big, big thing, right? I just wanted to ask you something.
Sure.
I'm going to show it to you. These round circles, I remember I have seen it on other weapons as well. What do these circles mean?
You know, I hate to show some of my ignorance, but I've read a number of different things, and most appear to be speculation. If I were a European archaeologist, I might have a tad better insight. But the circles and dots are often representative of the sun. They may also have some tribal significance because, of course, the Celtic tribes back then were kind of fractured and sort of all over Europe.
Yes.
I wish I could speak more specific to the decorative patterns, but you're right. I do see those. Another recurring theme is also the spirals, and
Yes.
seem to have very similar meanings no matter what culture they're found in. They're found from South America to Southeast Asia to Europe, and all seem to be very similar in origin.
Perfect. Rich, I have another question. What is this? Is it like representative of a plant? I can see it here and here.
It looks almost like the fletching of an arrow.
Okay,
but
sure.
I also agree that it could be representative of a plant. It's very difficult to tell. The lighting is not really good in the photographs. I do have the piece sitting in the cabinet behind me. I don't know if we could get a better image of it off the computer video or not.
Okay. Rich, another question. What is this close to the edge of the axe blade?
Let me look at it again with it in my hand here.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sure.
Make sure I have the same side. Yeah, so that is simply a spot of corrosion. There's a little bit of delamination in the surface corrosion, and then you have a repeat of the circular pattern on the edge of the blade. You also, on the opposite end, have that same circle dot pattern.
Yes.
And it's always in threes. So
yes.
There has to be some significance to the fact that it's in threes.
That's true. That's true. Just for our viewers to understand, this was used to have like a handle, possibly made of wood, which is, I mean, most of them lose that, which was inserted here. Am I correct?
Sir. That is correct.
And It has two axe blades. Am I correct? One is here, one is here.
Yes.
Okay. Was it a was it a tool or a war instrument, a weapon, or both?
My understanding is it would most likely have been both.
Both.
Due to the value of bronze in the Bronze Age, it's considerably more valuable than what we would attach to it in this day and age. It's very difficult to come across the raw materials. It's very difficult to produce these things. And so most of them, again, cross culturally, would have had multiple uses. As you can see, the blades would be good for cutting, for plowing, for
Yeah.
combat, for any number of things.
Yes, that's right. And how heavy is that approximately?
I do not have my scale handy, but it feels to me as though it's probably right around half a kilogram.
Oh, half a kilo. It's a heavy,
It's
huh?
it's fairly heavy for a Bronze Age axe.
Yeah, yeah, quite heavy. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
maybe a little less than half a kilogram.
okay. And just regarding the laminations and also corrosion,
Mhm.
for our viewers here, Rich, we have some parts which are like darkish brown, and some
Yes,
parts which you see a bit greenish and
yes.
yellowish. Can you explain these different colors to us, please?
So the brown would be basic oxidation, and that would be one of the first colors you'd see on almost anything that of this alloy type that was buried. It is a copper oxide.
Yeah.
Um, then the next stage of a deeper corrosion will lead you to the blues and the green hues that you see.
Yeah.
That becomes and I'm not a chemist, but I believe it's a copper carbonate hydroxide. That you see beginning as a little lighter green on the surface, but the corrosion is actually coming from inside the metal itself.
Yes.
And as it corrodes, depending on environmental factors, you will get more and more of that. This piece, because of its fairly oxidation free state, I would imagine if we were to do an alloy test, you would find it to be predominantly copper. And it's very heavy, like solid copper would be.
Ah, so did I understand you correctly? In general, we can say if it's solid copper, it tends to be heavier.
That seems to be the case, yes. And copper is surprisingly workable, but it's also, especially when it's been hammered, it can become harder, and so it makes very good weapons. Now they're by modern terms, as far as steel and steel alloys go, it's not much of a match. But for the time period, this would have been a very formidable tool, and you can see by how intact it still is after anywhere from 2,500 to 3,000 years, that it has definitely stood the test of time.
Yeah, unbelievable, unbelievable. Um, and just another thing about it, was it like cast in one mold or?
I believe that these were single mold cast and
Yeah.
then possibly finished by hammering, but it's difficult to tell just by examining the surface. As soon as I recently moved residences within the last, I don't know, a couple of years, and a lot
Yes.
of my tools that I had readily available at my old residence are still in boxes in my garage.
No, I
So,
understand.
yes, most of these would have been early castings,
Yes.
probably sand cast, though once we switch over to the Asian cultures, they had some pretty remarkable technology for the same time period.
Mm.
Uh,
Just the last question regarding that. These uh, these images, like circles and dots,
yeah.
or these arrow, let's put fletchings, were they
Okay.
added later by,
Yes.
but oh, okay, by chiseling, correct?
Yeah, chiseling or hammering is what it looks like was the manufacturing method on these particular decorations, and can't really. It would even appear that the ridges that you see, the flat surface where on the shaft hole, where the three dots, the three circles with the dots are,
Yeah.
Could also have been either hammered in afterwards, or it does not appear to be part of the original casting. I might say the same thing of the rings
Yes.
at either end of the socket,
Yeah.
but without a lot more study, it'd be difficult to say for sure.
Okay. So, but it was not like part of the mold. It was added later, correct?
That's my assumption. Yes, the decorations, I'm nearly 100% certain that is the case.
That's the case. Okay. We move on to the next piece. What do we have here, Rich?
Oh, now that is really an interesting piece. The subtype seems to be fairly common, and it's more in your area of expertise, I imagine, than it is mine.
Yeah.
But I've always been attracted to these slender, almost duck-billed shaped axes. I cannot imagine that they were very popular as working tools, because,
Yeah.
as you can see, the thin area of the axe blade itself would be very fragile. And I have
Yeah.
another one of these that's very similar in design that is, in fact, broken right in the middle. And I'm in the process of trying to restore that.
Yeah.
But I love what I'm assuming to be the ibex decoration on the back of the socket.
Yes, it is ibex. Yeah.
The craftsmanship, given this is likely somewhere around 1200 BC,
Yeah.
is pretty amazing. I
Amazing.
would say that just like the other one, there was a basic casting done, and then it was perhaps finished by hammering.
Mhm. You can clearly see the horns, the eyes, and nostrils.
Yes.
Unbelievable. Clearly. Right. That's right.
And just the fact that the horns are still present and there's no signs of restoration on this
Yeah.
axe at all, and I've looked at it fairly closely, that it's further suggests to me that it was probably not used as a tool very often. It would have not survived this long, because we're looking at over 3,000 years there.
What culture is it again?
I believe this is just falls into the generic category of Luristan.
Yeah.
Until I can find a more specific attribution. Most of the time, that's when I go to your books.
Yes.
And I look for similar pieces that you have found in museums.
Yes. The ibex looks very, very Iranian Persian look, right? I've seen it in different pieces. Where did they insert the handle, Rich?
So the sort of elliptic or ellipsoid shaped socket here, I don't know if you can see this.
Yes, I can. Yes.
So it's almost completely circular. It has, looking straight through the socket, you would have to have an oval shaft to make it fit correctly. But I believe that the shape of the socket itself helped retain it onto the shaft. And then
can I see the socket hole again, please?
Yeah.
Yeah.
See if I can.
Yes, I can see
there
that.
we go.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah. Workmanship is really amazing. And the interesting thing about the other one that I mentioned that's similar shape but has been broken in the middle is you can actually see the different phases of corrosion inside the copper alloy, from the oxides on the outside all the way down to, well, there's typically a red layer in the very middle and then more green as you move out. Yeah. And then kind of depends on the burial or the storage environment since being unburied as to what the outside begins to look like. But yes, all in all, quite a gorgeous piece.
Very. If I look at this piece and the piece we've seen before, I see a different color of patination. Is there a reason for that?
The colors that you see in the patinas are typically due to primarily the alloy and then the burial environment. And of course, most of the things that come from northern Iran typically came from dry environments, is my understanding. And so there's not quite the level of colorful corrosions that you may see in objects that come from different soil types or wetter environments, either in Europe to the west or Asia to the east.
Just one word. Lorestan is drier. Northern Iran is wet. Just
Okay.
one thing.
Well, I
Yes.
definitely appreciate that.
Yes, no problem. Yes.
In the location of Luristan, I need a little geographical assistance there. In relation to the entire country of Iran, is that more northern or more western?
Um, if you have Marlik and Amlash, it's in the north, and
Okay.
Luristan is south west,
South and
southwest.
west. Okay.
Yes,
That makes sense
that
then.
right. And this is drier area. That's for sure. That's for sure.
This looks to me like it was recovered probably not terribly long ago from a dry environment, so that would fit. Yes.
Okay, it's very interesting.
Wetter environments, we'd expect to see brighter colors, more reds, more greens. And there is a greenish hue to this, obviously, but
Yes.
it's more of that dark brown.
Yes, very beautiful. I love this color. It's just beautiful. What do we see here, please, Rich?
Oh, now these are stone pieces from Korea.
Wow.
These, especially in the Western markets, have been rather elusive because Korea, for a long time, has prevented exportation of their artifacts. But my understanding is that bronze was particularly scarce in ancient Korea and much more valued, and especially when they were burying objects or ritual objects, it did not make much sense to waste the valuable bronze, so they would carve stone implements that resembled the bronze implements of the time. And many of these that are now in the US came from soldiers fighting in World War II and in Korea when they noticed them either in markets or found them out in the fields, I imagine, and brought them back with them. And so the one that you have in the picture that's on the left is the larger one, to give you an example of scale. My average sized hand, that's what it would fit like. And so that would be a reproduction of a dagger and or a small sword. And then the other two would be spearheads. You can see there's been some extensive restoration to this one.
Yeah.
It appears to have been completely broken in at least 3, if not 4 places.
Yeah.
And expertly restored. It even still has its museum tag on the back. This one appears to be completely intact, but these could be representations of swords on a very small scale, or more likely, in my opinion, would be spear tips.
And they're made of what type of stone?
I do not know the type of stone, but I do know from seeing these in several antiquities auctions that they can be carved out of different types of stone, and I would imagine that it's from anything that was locally available in Korea at the time.
And what is the time frame, Rich? What's the time frame?
Time frame on these seems to be around 500 BC to perhaps even a little bit into the Common Era. It's much more difficult to date these because there's no organic material, obviously. And so most of the dating is done by either stylistic references, or if you can know for sure exactly where it was uncovered, or have some level of provenance, which this one I believe has. I don't have it with me. It's another one of those things that's in my boxes from the move. And the work, the detail on these is incredible. I don't know how easy that would be to see from the photograph. You can tell that the tang has been broken.
Yes.
Slightly.
Yes.
But you can also see around where there would be, if it was a sword, there would be a guard. Just the very sharp, very refined edges. The surface has been worked to be very smooth. It's super symmetrical. You have the fuller down the middle, and the tapering edges to both sides are almost perfectly symmetrical. It truly took an artist to create something like this.
Perfect. Yes, very beautiful. Very beautiful.
I've always been fascinated by those.
Yes, it's really unbelievable. What do we see here, Rich? What is this?
That is a ceremonial axe from the Dongson culture in Southeastern Asia. And it has some of their traditional decorative motifs. And it's actually fairly large. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons we are fairly certain also that it is a ceremonial piece or a ritual piece
Mhm.
is the pristine condition that it is in. And
Yeah.
the Dongsan cultures had lots of these shaped axes, and this is typically called a foot axe because it's shaped like a foot.
Yeah, it's true.
And you'll see so many variations on this theme, some with very elaborate casting work off to the sides. The decorations appear to be cut in after the fact. One of the downfalls of a lot of the Dongsan artifacts is they used a higher tin content in their bronze, which made them much more brittle. But it's also what accounts for the lighter patina.
Ah,
And so
that's the
this
reason.
light brown patina is has a lot of the tin oxide in it,
Yeah.
and some of the areas where you can see the delaminations, you see the patina becomes a little bit darker down to the core, where it becomes a little more red, a little more reddish brown. Um,
Yeah.
but and
Are they
the
like?
depth of the socket also suggests that it was more ceremonial than anything else. There is still some organic material in there,
Mhm.
but it's not something that I would want to be, defacing the object to get it out. But it is a beautiful piece.
Can I see the socket hole again, please?
Yeah,
Ah, so this then the okay, it goes in there.
yeah, and
Okay.
it's not very deep. There, you can see a little bit of the light
Yes.
reflecting and how deep it is. I believe
Yes.
that's remnants of a shaft because
Yes.
it does appear to be somewhat separated from the sides.
Yes.
And time and money notwithstanding, it would be possible to get a C14 date off that, I'm sure. Um,
Yeah.
but it's just a beautiful piece.
It is. It is. And these are like a combination of human beings with an animal head. Am I correct?
Yes,
Yes. Yeah.
definitely appear to be in some sort of ritual dress with the headdresses and the
Yes. And two
skirts.
snakes, two serpents on top, right? Or are they
Uh,
lizards?
yes, lizards of some sort, which seem to appear very prominently on Dongsan objects.
Oh, lizards.
But just the amount of detail in the work here is really incredible. And there's another one that's very similar to give you an idea.
Yeah.
This is a very unique piece, and I'm sorry I didn't show this to you earlier. But another example of some of the intricacies of some of the Dongsan axes. This is a miniature replica of what would have normally been a much larger one done in bronze, but this particular one is done in lead. And it's
Yeah.
very unusual to find these intact because of the fragile nature of lead itself, especially over the eons being buried and being handled or being found. Even if it was being plowed up in a field, the damage that can come to a lead artifact is much more likely and much more apparent. So to find one intact like this, that is one of the miniature votive lead versions, is very exciting.
That's interesting. Yeah. And what is the, if you have that, I mean, compared to copper alloy, did it have certain advantages or disadvantages if you want to compare them?
For which one now? For the smaller one?
Yeah.
The lead was easier to work and easier to come by, and I believe it was still used in some of the alloys in the um, last millennium prior to the Common Era. But again, bronze being the more valuable, more usable material,
Yeah.
a lot of times for the votive objects that were placed as burial goods, it made more sense to use lead than to waste the time and energy for casting bronze. This probably would not have been from an area or from a person who had the same status as the larger more decorated one.
Very nice.
These are amazing.
Amazing pieces.
Yes.
Oh, let me see. Is this Chinese?
That is also attributed to the Dongsan.
Dansung. Okay.
Yes. This was originally from the Alan Trong, if I'm not butchering his name too badly, collection. And the intricacies of this particular piece, you see some of the same swirling eye motifs, the spiral patterns we were talking about earlier, which feature very prominently in Dongsan decor. Mostly geometric decorations on this. It have the blade that is almost looks like a finger.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
The style itself is from a mainland Chinese implement called a ge. And I apologize if I'm also butchering the inflections on that one. My Chinese is not the best. But because of the thinness and the delicacy of every aspect of this, I would assume that this was also not an actual battle weapon, but more of a ceremonial or a ritual votive piece. The level of craftsmanship in this is astounding, especially for current times. I have done, in one of the other pieces, and I hate to get ahead of you, but one of the other pieces I had sent you examples of, we did full 3D laser scanning and sent it off to 3 different foundries to try to reproduce the piece. And even under using today's technology, we could not get something that was as refined as the original. Now, perhaps if we had gone to CNC manufacturing, we might could have matched the precision and the skill of these early bronze crafters, but using traditional casting methods, we could not make an object that was as refined and as precise as the ones that they made back then. And just to see the detail and the fact that there's hollow castings, or the casting is hollow inside of these wings that would have gone around the shaft. So a shaft would have had a split in the middle and would have gone up, and these pieces would have been bent around to secure it to the shaft, as well as lashings that would go through these holes around the backside. And in a traditional usable weapon, I have not seen any with this particular portion is called the nay downturn to this level, because you might imagine that would make it a little structurally unsound. But the blades were designed, especially when it's mounted to a shaft, to be good for stabbing, slashing, anti-cavalry. You could take out horse hooves. You could damage wagon wheels. You could do all sorts of things with a tool like this.
Yeah, unbelievable. Do you think they were like mounted on like a long shaft or a shorter shaft? You cannot tell, right?
I'm gonna have to defer to what I know about the Chinese counterparts, which would have been the inspiration for these. The mainland Chinese pieces were typically mounted to a teardrop-shaped shaft that was anywhere from 1 to 3 meters, depending. So they could be used in close quarters battle. They could be used in, if you can imagine, a small shaft, say a meter, teardrop shape, so that the point would be this way, gives you the orientation in your hand without having to look at it, and so that it's not rotating around while you're trying to fight with something or someone. But then the Chinese would also have perhaps one like this on the top with a spear mounted to the top of the shaft, and maybe 1 or 2 more of these along the length of the pole. And so they could be used for a whole lot of different things on the battlefield.
Yes. And I see it has also decoration on it, right? It's very beautiful.
It has more of the spiral swirling patterns, and it's mostly geometric. I don't see any figures represented on it.
Yes.
Have some rhomboid shaped incisions, so a helical one down the middle, some hatching.
That's right.
And then, of course, the spiral
Yes.
that you see on the what we call the land, the part that's sticking down.
Yeah.
You'll see interconnected spirals,
Yeah.
and those appear real prominently in Dongson lore.
Yes. Where is this Donsang located in today's terminology? Which country would it be then?
It'd be in and around Vietnam,
Vietnam.
Cambodia, and places like that.
Okay. Wow.
Off the top of my head, I'd have to go back and check the textbooks to see exactly how far it ranged, but it was not as it was more concentrated in Southeast Asia than, say, the Khmer Empire was later on, or even the Han Chinese, and what we would call mainland China now. Um, Southeastern is probably about as specific as I could get, again, without going back to the text and double checking.
Yes.
You do see at the very tip of the blade on the bottom there,
Yeah.
something that is we as collectors don't like to see, and that is the beginning of bronze disease.
Ah, here, right?
Yeah, and if you
Yeah.
could see it close up, I wish I had my microscope hooked up. But in a piece that has bronze disease, the bronze becomes very porous and it actually expands. It's corroding from the inside out. It's usually a chain reaction, and it's very difficult to treat. I'm not saying it can't be treated, but the treatment process is kind of drawn out and long and requires the complete removal of that section. And if you keep it in a fairly dry, like less than 50% humidity, that tends to arrest the spread of the disease. But ultimately, if not treated, it will consume the entire piece. Now, whether that happens in 10 years or 1,000 years is really more dependent on the environment than anything else.
How can you stop it? Just by removing that part, or is there any way to say?
So I have had success in using an ultrasonic scaler to remove every bit. And when I mean every bit, I put it under a microscope and I make sure that all of that light colored area that you see is completely removed, even if that means there's no base metal left underneath it. Usually before doing that, it would get soaked in some deionized or distilled water until and what you'll see after you place it in a deionized water bath, you'll see outgassing for a period of time. The worse the bronze disease, the longer the outgassing will occur. But after the outgassing seems to stop, that's when I'll take it out and I'll scale all of that off. And then I'll put it back and do it again and make sure that I don't see any more. And once that's done, I'll actually dry it at low temperature and dehumidifier, and then put some microcrystalline wax over the top of it. And that should keep it safe for at least our lifetimes or the next couple of generations. But it's one of those things where once you have it, you definitely need to watch it. Because like I say, it could stay like what you see here in this picture. It could stay for 3-4 more generations if it's kept in the right humidity level. Or in the span of a year, you could see it expand to twice its size. And when you see it starting to move like that, it's really time. Yeah, it's bad to have to cut out a piece of such a wonderful looking artifact, but it's not as bad as having the entire thing destroyed over the next couple of generations. So it's the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks you.
And you see a similar spot on the opposite end.
Yeah.
Light color.
Yeah.
That's really, yes, that is not the same thing. So if I had a little bit higher resolution, you would see that that's really more of a delamination with a corrosion over the base metal rather than the bronze disease, which tends to be, it puffs up and rises above the base metal, where you don't have that with the traditional corrosion that you see on the opposite end. So that's one of the ways that you would tell the difference between normal corrosion and bronze disease.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Okay, we go now to one of my favorites you share.
One of mine as well.
First of all, let us, before we go into details, where does this piece come from?
This comes from, I believe it's northern Sichuan in the eastern Tibetan Plateau. Is as much as we can narrow down the origin at this point. It's attributed to the Chang minority, which is still one of the recognized minorities in China, and they still occupy that same region, but they have moved and the boundaries have fluctuated. And so a very specific attribution is difficult, but it's going to be somewhere in the Sichuan area, Eastern Tibetan, Western Han border, somewhere in that general area. And the reason I sent you this piece is not only because it's been such an interesting piece. It is no longer in my possession, but I had it for quite some time. And I recently saw, by virtue of a friend of mine who frequents auctions as well, he found another one very similar to this at a recent auction and asked me what I thought, because they had attributed it to Iran. And I'm like, this is definitely not from Iran.
No, it's not.
And so I started rifling back through my papers because I knew I had one of these at one point, and it kind of energized my interest in this one piece, because this came from back in the 90s when they were doing the Three Gorges Dam project. There was a flood of particularly Sichuan area artifacts and cultures associated with that area.
Yes.
This one appeared at an auction in Hong Kong, and I was a budding collector at the time, and my finances were a bit limited, and I loved watching the auctions, but I could never really afford to buy much. But a friend of mine here in the States, who got me interested in ancient weaponry and ancient weapon collecting, was the one who purchased it from this auction. And unfortunately, he passed only a few years later. Ooh. And I was able to acquire it from his estate auction. When I got this piece, I started doing the research, and to refresh my memory, I went back to a lot of the documents that I had at the time. And this particular style of dagger is very unusual. It's very limited to that somewhat specific region of Asia. And I believe the last text that I saw, which may have been as much as 20 years ago, said that there are less than 5 known examples of this particular type that have ever been excavated. As I looked at it, one of the first things I like to do, especially with a new piece, is put it under a microscope to examine the patina, because oftentimes that is the best way to tell if you have a modern forgery or you have an authentic ancient artifact. And I began finding the fossilized or mineralized remains of insects that were actually part of the original patina. And the more I looked, the more I found. And the image that you have on the screen now is just a representation of the area, location, and relative size of the major different fossils, or I'm calling them fossils if that is not the correct term. I'm sure somebody will correct me, but these are just the major ones, and they represent almost every stage of life cycle of a common fly, and then there's some on there of moths.
Yeah, moths, yes.
And the theory is that the particular culture involved, the Chang, for many of their funeral practices, the body would be moved into a cave and left untreated with whatever its important belongings were, and left that way for, if not weeks, sometimes months, for people to visit, or for whatever their burial rituals may have been. And so the most compelling argument we could come up with was that this artifact was not necessarily even buried with the person who owned it or it represented, but that it was actually in contact with the decaying body at some point, which accounts for the large number and the span of life cycle representations that you see on the surface of this blade. And it's not just on one side. One side seems to be more related to flies,
Yeah.
and the other side seems to have more representations of moths.
Yes.
I have contacted, and it was very difficult to find, but I believe he was in Denmark, an individual who specializes in archaeoentomology. And he was able to identify one of the flies based on its wing venation because the mineralized remains were specific enough to see the vein patterns in that particular fly. And I was very impressed with that. But yeah, to see every one of these black and white images that you see here has a corresponding micrograph, anywhere from 10 power to 100 power. Some of the smaller, more elaborate ones I did up to 100 power. But you can see there was quite an extensive amount of work done on this particular piece. Yeah. And hopefully someday I can compile it all into a publication. And
absolutely.
I think you'd be the first one I'd share it with.
No, absolutely. I would do my best to support the publication of your article on this. I think this deserves lots of attention. It's unbelievable.
Well, right. And one of the main things that was expressed to me by my archaeoentomologist was the sheer rarity in the fossil record of these mineralized remains of soft-bodied organisms. So it may be one thing to find, it's hard enough to find fossilized insects, but to find the mineralized remains of the larvae,
yeah,
and of the eggs is even more outstanding. And then here we have one piece that has, if I'm just doing a cursory count, maybe 36 mineralized larvae forms. And
do you think that the man who died, the dagger was on him, and then the decomposition led to all these larvae and all these flies, and then all of a sudden?
So the individual I spoke with, the entomologist, said that for this type of mineralization to have occurred with all of these, with the egg, the larva, the pupa, and the adult, the body, or I'm not even going to say body because that is, it's probably correct, but it's not something that you can sit here and actually prove. It would have to have been in a very moist environment for at least 1 to 2 life cycles of each represented insect. Would have had to have been moist enough for an egg to be laid, and it would have to have something for the fly or the moth to want to lay its egg in, which would have to be a nutrient-rich environment. And then that environment would have to remain moist long enough for the larva pupa to develop. The adults, you can't say for sure, came from the eggs and the larvae and the pupa that are present here, but they were certainly in the environment. But then at some point, rather abruptly, that moist environment, whether it be mud or decaying tissue or a combination, would have to have dried up fairly quickly to freeze all of those eggs, larvae, pupa, and adults in place long enough for them to become then mineralized down the line. So it really is an amazing artifact, and I don't know that I have ever seen anything like this in any of the texts that I've had access to.
Just two more questions. How old is this dagger? Can we give it approximate date?
The excavated examples, again, which are very few, are right around, the tombs were dated at 500 BC.
500 BC.
And so because of their relative rarity, the specificity of the type to the particular culture and region, I would say it would have to be very close to that time frame.
And what does this curved hook serve? What is this?
I would assume that it would function much like a modern day guard would.
Oh, okay.
But you would then wonder, why is it only on one side?
Yeah.
But again, so little is known because there's so few of these extant that
Yes.
it's really just a matter of interpreting form to function. I would assume, because in the other examples that I have seen in the literature, and again, that's less than 5 or 6,
Yes.
you have the what I'm going to call a lanyard hole in the
Mm.
pommel
Yeah.
that's opposite that particular quillin, if
Yeah.
we can call it that. So it would lead me to believe that the lanyard hold would be oriented in the hand towards the wrist, while the quillin would be away. So that
Away.
would make it perfect for stopping another blade attack or something similar.
Yeah.
Whether or not I'm spot on with that, I'm just doing my best guess.
Mhm. And this is a fuller blade. Yes, it is, right?
It is. And those particular um, grooves were very precise
Very.
and very well carved into the surface.
Mhm.
This is the piece that I had 3D scanned, modeled, and then sent to 3 different bronze casting foundries to come up with a replica. And the
Mhm.
replica is nice, but when you look at it on, especially on a microscopic scale, the
Mhm.
lines just aren't as good. And bear in mind too, we're operating off a 3D scan of a 2,500-year-old object that's been subjected to, the elements for that length of time.
Yes.
And yet we corrected in the CAD model, we corrected the losses at the edge
Yes.
because that was simple and didn't detract from the original piece itself. And it was pretty easy to say that that would have been the way it had been cast. But we did not correct for any of the decorations. We did correct for the blood grooves
Yes.
in the fuller,
Yeah.
just to remove the sediment and everything else that had collected over the years. But even still, the final piece, cast here it was the 21st century, right around the early 2000s, was still not quite of the detail quality as the original.
Yeah.
And that really stuck with me as something that leads to just how outstanding these craftsmen were back then, and how much time and energy went into making these things.
Yes, absolutely. And
But
now, here you have this beautiful fly on it, right?
that is one of the flies from the surface of the blade. And like I say, there are several more. Some you can even see the ommatidia in the eye. It's so
Yes.
specific.
Yeah,
This
here.
one, the
Yeah.
vein pattern isn't quite as clear as some of the others. But this, if I recall correctly, was one of the most complete mineralized remains of an insect on the surface. The others, we might have gotten a wing or an eye or a head, thorax, something like that. But this was almost a complete representation. And it's obvious that he was not in any kind of distress, or I'm not going to say obvious, I'll say apparent, that where he sat there and either died without struggle or just was simply, encased in, like we said, the blood or the mud or the goop that must have been on the surface of this piece. Because, I mean, you would expect to see a housefly like that flying around right now. And that's what they look like when they land. So he was frozen in time.
Yes. And it has like a checkered pattern here. Yeah, it does, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And those are the individual cells of the eye.
Yeah, that's right.
And so the detail just in the mineralization process meant that this had to go undisturbed for quite some time.
Yeah. And this one as well. This is also beautiful.
That is one of my favorite micrographs that I think I've ever taken. I've taken thousands, because you can see that the organism's remains were once encased in this green layer, which is essentially like a malachite layer. It's another copper carbonate hydroxide, which the blue, which is sort of analogous to azurite, just has an extra oxygen molecule, is my understanding.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you see the azurite areas in a patina turning or blending into the malachite areas or the green area. The blue becomes the green over time. And
Yes.
so what this was a hollow casing, really. And then the outer layer of the green chipped off to reveal the internal structure of, and I'm gonna say this was a pupa based on just the structures that I see here. Looks like you see the beginning of legs
Yes. You do.
and the beginning of a head and the differentiation of the tail and all that. But
Unbelievable.
it's, to me, it's just incredible. I love the colors. The colors were not enhanced at all. This is what I was looking at when I looked under the microscope and saw it. And this entire piece, I wish I had my scale bar. I want to say this was about a 2 millimeters.
True.
Roughly.
Yeah.
The full grown fly was very small, only about 5 millimeters, maybe
Yeah.
8. So they're very small, but it's according to my entomologist, they are a very common species that's still alive in the world, and especially based on the size and the wing venation. Pardon me. But yes, that is again one of my all-time favorite micrographs.
Yes, unbelievable. Thank you very much, Rich. That was really a very, very beautiful presentation and fruitful discussion. Very valuable. Thank you very much for all this. I really appreciate
Looking
that.
forward to doing some more.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk about different weapons with you and have you, our viewers, benefit from your knowledge. We are growing like massively on YouTube, massively.
Good.
So I would really love more people to get to know you and also to know more about your expertise on weapons. It's very, very important that people get to know experts. So experts like you who we just can share the knowledge on this here. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Rich, and I hope to see you soon.
Definitely. Me too. Thank you very much.